Liar! Thief! Every one of you is the same!
We don't want you here. I am tired of your type.
Weren't you ashamed of yourself when you stole those medications?
I am going to take Elias from you.
The judge looked at the file. Elias would stay with his father during the week and with his mother on weekends. A single mother accused of theft, a manager who committed the actual theft, and an ex-husband ready to seize the opportunity to take custody of her son. Let's begin this powerful story. Her photo is on every news channel, with one line running underneath it. Technicians stole medication and sold it. Her son's friends are talking about it at school. People who recognize her on the street cross to the other side. The gossip spreads, sometimes in whispers, sometimes at full volume. Dulcie was about to face maybe the hardest test of her life. But there's a fair-minded billionaire watching all of this closely. Will everything work out? Will Dulcie get custody of her son back? Will the person who actually committed the theft be punished? Let's begin this powerful story. On a Tuesday morning, more than 50 people sat in the third-floor conference room at Mercer Memorial Hospital, and every one of them was looking at the same name. On the screen at the front of the room, projected in a table with a single line marked in red, Watson, D. Pharmacy technician. Controlled substance count discrepancy. 340 tablets. Dulcie Watson sat near the back. She had her usual 2 pins in her scrub pocket, one blue, one red. When she read her own name up on the screen, her fingers stopped for a second around the red pin. Then she pushed it back into her pocket. A lot of people in the room turned to look at her right then. Nobody said anything. Nobody said, "There must be some mistake." 2 nurses from the ER glanced at each other. Even Jacques Jarvis, who'd shared her shift for years, dropped his eyes to the table. At the podium stood Kevin Bowman, the pharmacy operations manager. He was in his 40s, the kind of man whose shirts never seemed to wrinkle, who liked to drop people's names into the middle of his sentences when he talked. "This isn't an accusation," Kevin said, his voice smooth over the microphone. "This is an audit finding. But according to the records from the last 4 months, out of the 11 shifts where this discrepancy occurred, one name shows up at the prep station in 9 of them. Dulcie, company policy requires you to turn in your access badge until the review is complete." 340 tablets. Dulcie understood exactly what that number meant, better than anyone else in the room. It didn't just mean getting fired. It meant a report to the state board. It meant losing her certification. If it came to that, it meant the police. And it meant a ready-made letter to Elias's father's lawyer. Elias's father had spent a year looking for a reason to change the custody arrangement. There was no better reason in the world than his mother was accused of stealing drugs. When the security guard came over, Dulcie stood up. She dropped the badge into the guard's open palm. "Kevin," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, given the room. "Did you hand over the April transfer log to the auditors too?" Something flickered across Kevin's face. Maybe some part of him thought he'd been caught, and his body reacted before he could stop it. Something small, a muscle under his eyelid, half a second maybe. Then he smiled. "All the documentation's with the auditors, Dulcie. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." The guard opened the door. Dulcie walked out through the silence and the judging stares of more than 50 people. Out in the hallway, as the door swung shut behind her, she heard Kevin's voice from inside. "Right, moving on to item 2 on the agenda, the maintenance schedule for the cold chain refrigerators." At the same hour, across town at Whitehaven Elementary, Elias Frazier was drawing a table on the back page of his math notebook. His teacher was up at the board explaining fractions, but Elias's table had nothing to do with fractions. In the left column, he wrote dates. In the right column, he wrote bus numbers. His mother always told him, If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So Elias wrote everything down. What time the bus came, what they served for lunch, the last day his father had called him. When Dulcie got out to the parking lot, her phone buzzed. An automated email from HR. Unpaid administrative leave, salary payment suspended for the duration of the review. Her pay suspended. She had less in her bank account than it would take to cover a week of groceries. Rent was due on the 1st, and forget covering a full month's rent. What she had left might stretch a week and a half, might not. And today was the 22nd, with payday still a ways off. She didn't even try to run the numbers. Elias's asthma medication was due for a refill, $38, and she never forgot that number. Even on days she forgot her own name, she never forgot that. Dulcie could add up those 3 figures in her head without writing them down. She'd been closing out every month with math like that for 7 years. She got in her car. She didn't turn the key. She sat there, staring at the steering wheel and thought, for a while, the way any adult does. I'm sure a lot of you listening have had a moment like this in your own lives. She couldn't get that line on the screen out of her head. 9 out of 11 shifts. That part was true. She had been at the station during those shifts. But there was something Kevin hadn't put up on that screen. In every one of those 9 shifts, the batches of medication where the count came up short had been transferred from the storeroom to the station under Kevin's own signature. In April, when the barcode scanners in the system had been down for 2 days, the transfers had been logged by hand. Dulcie remembered those logs because Dulcie was the one person who didn't have the luxury of forgetting things. Because in Dulcie's apartment, on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, there was a notebook with a yellow oilcloth cover, its edges gone slick with grease. For 7 years, every single shift, riding the bus home, she'd sat there and written it all down in her own hand. Every transfer that passed through the station that day, every batch number, every signature, who brought it in, who took it out. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody knew about it. Back in her first year on the job, she'd watched a count error get one of the other technicians walked out the door overnight, and that evening she'd stopped at the store and bought that notebook. Kevin Bowman knew Dulcie Watson liked to keep records. Everybody knew that. People used to tease her about it. What Kevin didn't know was that the notebook on her shelf right now was the 6th one, and that the one covering April wasn't even sitting in Dulcie's apartment anymore. Dulcie turned the key. Before she headed to the school, there was somewhere she needed to go first. Tucked between the pages of one of those notebooks were 3 lines that could end Kevin Bowman's career. The problem was, those same 3 lines in the wrong hands would be more than enough to cost Dulcie her son, too. Joanne Burns's house sat in South Memphis, a brick house with the same 2 plastic chairs that had been out on the porch for 40 years. The kind of porch where the sweet tea never runs out, you know. When Dulcie knocked on the door at 9 on Wednesday morning, her mother answered without even taking off her apron, hands still dusted with flour, gospel music playing on the radio. "What are you doing here in the middle of a workday?" "They gave me some time off," Dulcie said. It wasn't really a lie. Not saying how long that time off would last didn't make it one. Maybe a small one. But she was too worn out to try explaining something she hadn't even worked through herself, let alone lay it out for her mother. Her mother's sewing box sat on top of the dresser in the bedroom, with a card of buttons left over from Dulcie's childhood still pinned to the lid. A few weeks back, the day the count rumors first started making the rounds, Dulcie had brought the April notebook here, tucked it under the spools of thread, and told her mother just one thing. "Don't give this to anybody unless I say so, no matter who comes asking." Joanne hadn't asked any questions that day. She didn't ask any today either. She just watched her daughter open and close the lid of the sewing box, checking that the notebook was still there, then went back to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. "Is it Fraser again?" she asked. "No," Dulcie said. Then she looked down into her cup. Not yet. 7 years ago, in the middle of the divorce, Fraser had pulled something like 6 or 7 months' worth of rent out of their joint account one evening. Then a week later, through his lawyer, claimed Dulcie had taken it. He had no proof, but he knew Dulcie didn't either. The money had been withdrawn in cash from a branch with no cameras, and nobody could ever prove whose wallet the card had been sitting in. The judge had called it inconclusive and moved on, but the neighborhood hadn't moved on. Frazier told the story at church, at the barbershop, at dinner tables with mutual friends, told it to more or less everyone who mattered in that town, and from there it spread mouth to mouth. Dulcie took the money and hid it. Dulcie isn't who we thought she was. We didn't know her at all. We had a snake in our house and didn't even know it. How loud they shout will always sound quieter than the gossip. Throw enough mud and some of it sticks. It really does. A few weeks after that, in her first month on the job at Mercer Memorial, she'd watched a technician named Renfro get walked out the door overnight over a count error. And nobody ever did figure out whether it was even his mistake. That was how the notebook habit started, the one we just told you about. After the coffee, Joanne pulled a roll of bills, wrapped in a rubber band, out of the tin on top of the refrigerator. She didn't even count it out loud. Take this, for the rent. Mom, Dulcie Watson, have I asked you for help even once in the quarter century I've spent cleaning other people's houses? No, but you never did learn how to ask me for anything, so I'm giving it before you have to. That same feeling rose up in her again. The one that never went away no matter who she was asking. That discomfort of needing money from someone, even her own mother. Maybe she didn't want her mother to feel that same discomfort, that sneaky thing that looks one way from the outside and feels another way inside. But no, her mother wasn't like that. That was just her own worry talking. Dulcie took the money. She spent part of it that same evening on Elias's asthma medication and the electric bill, and put the rest in an envelope for rent. What was in the envelope still didn't come to half of what she owed, and rent was due in 9 days. She kept a notes app on her phone like everybody else, but her real record-keeping always happened on paper. She added 3 lines. Ask HR for a written statement deadline. Certification board notification window, 30 days. State inspector complaint form? On Thursday, a 1-line email came in from Ethan Barton, the HR director. During the course of this review, you are asked to refrain from discussing the case with hospital staff. Which meant she couldn't call Jacques. She couldn't call Ozma. 7 years of co-workers had turned into people she wasn't allowed to talk to. Overnight. Friday evening, while Elias was doing his homework at the kitchen table, the phone rang. Frazier, the screen said. He never missed a beat, always called the second he heard something. All of this had landed right in his lap. So I heard, Frazier said. He didn't even say hello. There was that satisfaction in his voice, the one Dulcie hadn't been able to forget in 7 years, the ease of a man who thought he'd already won. You're in some kind of serious trouble at work, something about drugs. Dulcie turned her back to Elias and dropped her voice. Who told you that? Doesn't matter who told me, Dulcie. What matters is that my son is living in the house of a woman under investigation for drugs. The review is still, you'll be hearing from my lawyer Monday. The line went dead. Dulcie stood there in the middle of the kitchen. Behind her, Elias was writing something with his pencil. He didn't look up, but his writing had slowed down. How many of you lived through a scene like this as a kid, or even as an adult? Tell us in the comments where you're from and what your story is. We'd love to hear from you. The letter didn't even wait until Monday. Certified mail showed up Saturday afternoon. Frazier's lawyer was filing for an emergency review of the custody arrangement, citing an ongoing controlled substance investigation. Dulcie read the letter standing in the doorway. It wasn't the kind of letter you could read standing up. By the second paragraph, she stopped and read the same sentence 3 times. Information available to our client indicates the discrepancy in question totals 340 tablets. 340. She couldn't wrap her head around it. There was no way this was a mistake. That number had never gone to the press. It had never been said out loud anywhere outside that staff meeting. The investigation file was confidential. There was exactly one way Fraser could know that number. Someone in that room full of people, or someone with access to the file, had carried it straight to him. Dulcie set the envelope down on the kitchen table, next to Elias's homework. Then she looked up at the top shelf of the cabinet, at the empty space where the notebook used to sit. Kevin Bowman wasn't just trying to end her career. Somebody was feeding ammunition to a man who wanted to take her son away from her. And Dulcie Watson was not going to get caught without proof a second time in her life. She'd sworn that to herself. If she had to, she'd read through every record from start to finish, over and over. Stay up all night at the kitchen table until morning. She would find it. For a single mother, keeping her reputation intact and standing her ground meant everything. On Sunday evening, Elias came back from his father's house quieter than usual. He set his bag down by the door, ate 2 bites of dinner, said, "I'm full," and went to his room. Dulcie chalked it up to the usual tiredness that came after every weekend at his dad's. It wasn't that. On the back page of Elias's math notebook, there was a new line that evening, and for 2 days, Elias had been going back and forth on whether to show it to his mother. Monday morning, Dulcie didn't text Ozma Duffy from her own phone. She sent one line through the messaging feature of a game app on Elias's old tablet. Thursday morning spot, 10 o'clock. Ozma showed up. She glanced back over her shoulder walking in and sat down next to the hum of the dryers. "If I'm doing this," she said, "I want you to know I'm putting 8 years of seniority on the table." "I know." "Then listen, because I'm not saying it twice." Ozma counted off on her fingers, one by one. 1. Corporate didn't call for the audit. Kevin did. He called an audit on his own department. Who does that, Dulcie? Once you figure out the answer to that, you'll have figured out everything. 2. There's a line going around the hallways about how you had money troubles, and it's coming out of the same mouth every time. 3. HR is getting ready to send your file to the state certification board within 30 days. 4. Ozma stopped, and her voice went dry. You remember who was working the storeroom shift the week the barcode scanners went down in April? Dulcie remembered. Junior Rowe. Junior got shuffled off to East Campus real quick in May, with a raise. Guess who signed off on his transfer? Junior Rowe picked up on the 3rd ring. When he heard Dulcie's voice, he went quiet first. She could hear a kid in the background, a TV on. Dulcie, you shouldn't have called. Junior, you're the one who carried the April logs. From the storeroom to the station. How many pages were they? A long silence. Then Junior's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. 17. 17 pages, because I counted while I was carrying them, because that whole week everything was going wrong, and I count things too, same as you. A breath. And I know how many pages they were when they went into the archive too. Don't ask me that. Dulcie's heart started racing. Junior, would you write that down somewhere? Something signed, No. The word shut like a door. I've got a 6-year-old daughter. I've got a car payment. My mom's on my insurance for her medication. That man gave me East Campus, and he can take it back just as easy. You're a good woman, Dulcie. You always were. But I'm not a hero. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Dulcie sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the truth laid out in front of her. There was a truth. The truth had a witness. That witness had a name, an address, a phone number. And none of that added up to a single scrap of paper without the signature of a frightened man. And honestly, she couldn't even blame him. Life wasn't that black and white. There were gray areas. A man had his own responsibilities. Maybe a daughter to look after, or medication to pick up for his mother. Bills, taxes, all of it. Nobody could put that on the line. It wasn't that simple. Dulcie wrote 2 words in her notebook. 17 pages. Underneath, she added, "How many pages in the archive?" Right then, her phone buzzed. A notice from family court. Fraser's emergency motion had been accepted. Hearing date, 3.5 weeks out. Rent due in under a week and a half. Certification board notification, 30 days. 3 deadlines, and each one tightened the knot in Dulcie's chest a little more. "Mom?" Dulcie looked up. Elias was standing in the doorway, his math notebook clutched to his chest, one pajama leg pushed up higher than the other. "Weren't you supposed to be asleep?" Elias didn't answer. He came over to the table slowly, opened his notebook, and turned the back page toward his mother. In pencil, in his own crooked handwriting, he'd added a new line to his little table. Sunday, after 8 o'clock. Dad on the phone. "Don't worry, we'll have everything we need before the hearing." Then he said a name. Elias put his finger on the word at the end of the line, spelled the way a 9-year-old spells things. Bowman. "Mom," Elias said, his voice thin. "Who's Bowman? And why is Dad talking to him about you?" The family courtroom was smaller than Dulcie had pictured. No high ceilings, no wood-paneled benches, just a room with fluorescent lights, a table, a bench, and a clock on the wall that ran slow. But lives could get torn apart in small rooms just as easily. Fraser's lawyer opened a thin folder and spoke with the ease of a man who knew how to make a thin folder sound like a thick one. The administrative leave letter, the email showing her pay, had been suspended, and the letter that mentioned that number, 340, which the lawyer set down on the table with the words, "Information reaching my client." Every time that number came up, "Your Honor, we're not alleging that Ms. Watson is guilty of anything," the lawyer said. He said it in a tone that managed to argue the exact opposite. "We're simply asking that until an ongoing controlled substance investigation is resolved, the child remain with the parent who currently offers income and household stability, and only on a temporary basis." The judge turned to Dulcie. "Ms. Watson, you don't have counsel." "No, Your Honor, I'm on the appointment list, but is there anything you'd like to say?" Dulcie's hand rested on the cloth bag in her lap. Inside it, wrapped in a towel, was the notebook. She'd taken it from her mother's sewing box that morning, just in case. This was the moment she could pull the notebook out, show it page by page, whose signature was on the April transfers, whose hands those batches had passed through during the week the scanners went down. She could stand up and say, "I'm not the one who's guilty here. The man who accused me is," and then what would happen? This wasn't a pharmacy audit. This was a custody hearing. This judge couldn't read a medication log, and even if he could, he had no authority over it here. But the lawyer sitting at the other table could read it just fine. And tomorrow morning, Kevin Bowman would wake up knowing exactly what she had, word for word. A woman with 19 days left would have fired her one bullet into an empty room. Junior's words, "I know how many pages they were when they went into the archive too," would turn into an unprovable whisper, and Kevin would have all the time in the world to clean up every last piece of paper still standing between him and the truth. Worse, it would hand Kevin a brand new weapon, a technician who copied company records and kept them at home. What looked like armor would turn into a coffin. Her mother's voice was in her ear. "Evidence goes on the right table at the right time, girl. Show it too soon and it disappears." Dulcie took her hand off the bag. "I just want to say this," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She'd practiced that in front of the mirror that morning. "I've been the one steady thing in my son's life for 9 years. When this investigation is over, I'll be cleared. And on that day, we're all going to see that this decision was made in too much of a hurry." The judge looked at the file, looked at the clock. Then he read out his ruling. Until the investigation was resolved or the court conducted a new review, Elias would stay with his father during the week and with his mother on weekends. This is a temporary measure, the judge added, as if the word made it lighter somehow. Out in the hallway, Fraser stopped as he passed Dulcie. He lowered his voice, just low enough for her alone to hear. 7 years ago, everybody believed me, he said. Look at that. They still do. There's just something about you that rubs people the wrong way, Dulcie. Dulcie looked at him and said nothing. Saying nothing was the most expensive skill she'd learned over the years. It was also the hardest. Wednesday evening, they packed Elias's bag together. Dulcie tucked a spare asthma inhaler into the front pocket and taped a label on it that read, Morning Night. Elias lined up his socks in silence. A 9-year-old's silence can be louder than any adult's shouting. At the door, when Fraser's horn sounded outside, Elias suddenly set his bag down, pulled out his math notebook, and carefully tore out the back page along its crease, the one with Bovman written on it. He folded it and pressed it into his mother's hand. You keep this one, he said. I'll start a new one over there. You taught me that. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. He paused a second. But if I write it down, it did happen, right, Mom? Dulcie hugged her son and managed not to cry until the horn sounded a second time. That night on the phone, Joanne was furious. You had that notebook right there and you didn't show it. They took my grandson, Dulcie. They took him temporarily, Mom. But if I'd opened that notebook on the wrong table, I'd have lost him for good. Dulcie stood looking out the window at the street. 7 years ago, I spoke up with nothing to back me and nobody believed me. This time I have proof and I'm keeping quiet. Those aren't the same thing. This time, I'm waiting. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Joanne spoke in that softened voice she'd used since Dulcie was a little girl. You used to write dates on jam jars when you were small. I used to laugh about it. I'm not laughing anymore. That same week, on the 11th floor of Mercer Health Group's downtown headquarters, Roosevelt Drake was bent over a report. Drake was 70 years old. 40 years ago, he'd bought a single clinic with 2 partners. Today, he was the founder and board chairman of a health system with 14 hospitals across 5 states. On paper, he was Kevin Bowman's boss's boss's boss, everyone's boss, a billionaire. He didn't wear a pin on the lapel of his gray suit. Men whose signature carries weight don't need one. In the quarterly audit report in front of him, pharmacy loss rates for every hospital in the system were lined up one under the other. Every line sat within the normal range, except one, Mercer Memorial. And in that line's remarks column, a single sentence. Responsible party identified, administrative process initiated. Drake took off his glasses. There was one thing 40 years had taught him. Files that close too fast are files nobody dug into deep enough. He called Idris Salas, the system's chief pharmacist. Idris, that count discrepancy file over at Memorial. Find me 2 things. 1, why was a technician's name put up on a screen more than 50 people before the investigation was even finished? I want to know what that's going to cost us legally. 2, pull the original hand-log transfer records from April out of the archive. Not a copy, Idris. The originals. 2 days later, Idris Salas called back. There was an odd carefulness in his voice. Mr. Drake, the records are in the archive, stamped, filed, in order. A pause. 14 pages. Drake turned toward the window. 14, he repeated. And what's strange about that, Idris? What's strange is that on the archive intake form, in the handwritten entry the person delivering them filled out, the page count's been corrected. A number's crossed out and 14's written over it. Can't make out what the crossed out number was. But across town, in a notebook sitting on a kitchen cabinet shelf, and in the memory of a frightened man, that number still read perfectly clear. 17. The apartment without Elias during the week had a sound of its own, and Dulcie hadn't known it could get that loud. The hum of the fridge, the drip of the faucet, the cartoon theme song that was supposed to play at 7 and didn't anymore. Thursday evening, she caught herself cooking pasta for two, standing over the pot, and only when she remembered who the second half was for did she turn off the stove. But even Dulcie Watson's grief kept a schedule. If she was going to cry, she cried between 9 and 9:30 at night, because that was when Elias called, and her son wasn't going to hear any crack in her voice. During the day, she kept working. No pay, no badge, but working. She sent her third written request to HR for a hearing date to submit her defense. Ethan Barton's answer was the same rehearsed line every time. The process is ongoing. Legal aid still hadn't gotten to her case. Dulcie had turned the kitchen table into a command center. Dates on the left, names in the middle, questions on the right. At the top, held to the wall with a fridge magnet, was the page Elias had torn out of his notebook. Bovman. Sunday night, a few hours after she'd dropped Elias off at his father's, the phone rang. Junior Rowe. Idris Salas came by East Campus today. Junior's voice kept slipping between a whisper and a regular tone. A door shut somewhere behind him like he'd ducked into the bathroom to hide. The system chief pharmacist, Dulcie, from corporate. He was asking about the May transfers. My transfer. They're going to call me in to give a statement, I know it. Junior? You don't get it, his voice broke. Back in May, when I was signing my transfer paperwork, Kevin slid another form in front of me, an archive correction form. He said, "There was a count error, just initial it." A long breath. I didn't initial it, Dulcie. I said, "I didn't count that," and I put the pen down. Kevin laughed, said, "Doesn't matter," and pulled the form back. The next week, my raise and transfer went through. I didn't get it then. I get it now. That form was my hush money, and I've been paying it off in installments without even knowing it. Dulcie closed her eyes. There it was. The story behind that crossed-out number, coming straight from the mouth of a living witness. Junior, I'm only going to ask you for one thing, and lying isn't part of it. When they call you in, just tell the truth. If it was 17, say 17. If you didn't initial it, say you didn't initial it. You don't have to be a hero. Just count what you counted. You always did anyway. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Junior spoke in the voice of a very tired man. My daughter read me her homework tonight. It was a story about honesty. I was sitting there on the couch and I couldn't even look my own kid in the face. He paused. I've been writing some things down, Dulcie, the last few days, with dates. I haven't given it to anybody yet, but I'm writing it. If you're writing it down, that means it happened, Dulcie thought. But she didn't say it out loud. You don't shout at a man walking a thin line between fear and conscience. He'll fall through. That same week, for the first time in his career, Kevin Bowman caught the scent of something he couldn't control. He heard that Idris Salas had pulled the original records out of the archive. He heard that people were asking questions about transfer records over at East Campus. And when he read the email announcing that Roosevelt Drake himself would be sitting in on the quarterly audit review, he closed his office door and sat there for a long time. Men backed into a corner do one of two things: surrender or throw more fuel on the fire. Kevin picked up his phone with the ease of a man who'd spent his whole life choosing the second option. The next evening, on the 6 o'clock local news out of Memphis, a story ran. 340 tablets of a controlled substance have been found missing at Mercer Memorial Hospital. Sources tell us the investigation is centered on a technician working in the pharmacy department. And on screen, in the 2 seconds Dulcie forgot to breathe, an image appeared, pulled straight from the court filing, the custody petition. Her name was right there, legible, Watson Dulcie. Right after it, a photo that was unmistakably from the hospital's own files, her badge photo from 7 years ago. The face on that card, taken on her first day of work back when Elias was barely more than a baby, the same card she'd dropped into a security guard's palm 2.5–3 weeks ago. Dulcie was sitting on the couch and her own face was staring back at her from the television. Her phone buzzed, one line from Fraser, "The whole city's watching." It buzzed again. This time, it was Elias calling. His voice was tiny, like he was holding the phone under a blanket. Mom, Devin's dad watched the news. Devin's gonna tell everybody at school tomorrow. Not quite a sob. Worse, the silence of a kid swallowing one down. Mom, you didn't steal medicine, did you? Dulcie would never know how her voice managed to stay steady while she answered that question. No, baby, I didn't, and there's a notebook that proves it. After she hung up, Dulcie sat in the dark for a long time. Without meaning to, Kevin Bowman had just tied the noose around his own neck. A file that could have been quietly handled through internal channels, he'd flung out in front of the cameras, the lawyers, Roosevelt Drake, out into the middle of the public eye. This story couldn't be quietly closed anymore. Now, somebody was going to have to be proven right in front of everyone. A mother, a thief in her own child's eyes, a mother who just handed her ex-husband years later that same rush of winning all over again. Maybe, in the eyes of the whole city, a woman in ruins. How much worse could this possibly get? Dulcie stood up, walked over to the command center on the kitchen table, and added the shortest note she'd written yet to the page on top. Audit hearing. 9 days. I'm walking in there. The morning after the story broke, the hallway outside her apartment felt longer than Dulcie had ever known it to be. The woman on the second floor shut her door faster than usual, but when Dulcie reached into her mailbox, the landlord came over from the ground floor, dropped his eyes to the floor, and said quietly, "Rent can wait till the end of the month. Don't worry about it." Then he added, "People said something false about me once too. You don't forget that." He walked off before she could answer. On the 11th floor of corporate headquarters, Roosevelt Drake was watching the same news story a second time on his tablet. His face didn't change while he watched it. Drake's anger was the kind that never made a sound. "Idris," he said, turning off the screen. "The information in this story can only have come from one of two places, the court file or our own internal records. There's no badge photo in a court file. That photo came off our own servers." He set his finger down on the desk, didn't tap it, just set it down. Whoever handed a reporter the name and face of an employee whose case hasn't even been resolved just pushed this organization straight into a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. I want the entire pharmacy file on the table at the audit hearing. And Idris, go back through the list of who's cleared to be in that room. This gets cleaned up behind closed doors. Behind closed doors. Drake had said it to protect the organization. He didn't know yet who was going to end up standing in front of that door. Tuesday evening, there was a knock at Dulcie's door. Junior Rowe stood there in his work clothes, a brown envelope in his hand, wearing the face of a man who hadn't slept in 10 days. "I'm not coming in," he said. "If I sit down, my nerve's going to sit down with me and it won't get back up." He held out the envelope. 3 pages, the April week, who I got the logs from, who I handed them to, that I counted 17 pages, the correction form they put in front of me in May, and that I refused to initial it, all dated. He paused a second. Got it notarized at the bank. Cost $10. Heaviest $10 I ever spent in my life. "Junior, let me finish." He took a breath. "If they call me in, I'll come. I'll say it to their faces. If I lose East Campus, I lose it. I listen to my daughter read every night, and I want to be able to look at her while I do it." He turned to go, then stopped. Audit hearings Friday morning, 9 o'clock. The big conference room at Memorial, 3rd floor. Something bitter crept into his smile. "Same room where they took you apart. Might as well be the same room you come back from the dead in." Dulcie worked that night and the next. She lined up all 6 notebooks on the table, the April one in the middle. She went through the 11 shifts where the count discrepancy had shown up, one by one, laying out for each. Date, batch number, transfer signature. 9 out of 9 of those shifts, the same handwriting sat in the transfer column. Then she photographed every page of every notebook, put the memory card in an envelope, and drove it over to her mother's, tucked back into the sewing box where the notebook used to sit. "The original stays with me, the copy stays with you. Proof that only exists in one place isn't proof, it's just hope. I don't deal in hope. I deal in records. In the end, she put together a single page. One table, one sentence at the bottom. The lawyer who'd finally come through from legal aid pushed back on it over the phone. We really need something more comprehensive. Dulcie cut him off. Nobody reads a long document in a crowded room. They read one page. I've been putting together medication lists for doctors for 7 years. Anything longer than a page goes straight in the trash. The second thing, the lawyer said, mattered more, and Dulcie wrote that one down too. This audit hearing is an internal meeting. If you're not on the invite list, they're under no obligation to let you in, and honestly, they probably won't. I know, Dulcie said. You're still going to go? Dulcie looked over at the page taped to her fridge. Bovman. Her 9-year-old son had written that. A terrified storeroom worker had paid $10 to get a notarized statement. A nurse who'd put 8 years of seniority on the line had counted things off on her fingers in a laundromat. I'm going, she said. 7 years ago, I had my voice and no proof, and nobody listened. Now I have proof. This time, all they have to do is open the door. Friday morning, Dulcie put on her gray blazer, not the one from the courthouse, the one she'd worn on her very first day of work. In her cloth bag, she packed the April notebook wrapped in a towel, Junior's envelope, her own one-page table, and on top, folded with care, the notebook page Elias had torn out and given her. Her mother wanted to say a prayer over the phone. Dulcie said, "Keep it short." Joanne laughed and said the shortest prayer of her life. Lord, let them read the proof. At 20 to 9, Dulcie walked into the lobby of Mercer Memorial. 3 weeks ago, she'd gone out through that same door with a security guard at her side. This time, she walked in on her own 2 feet, headed for the elevators. Ma'am. The guard at the turnstile was a young man, and recognition crossed his face when he saw her, followed by hesitation. The photo from the news was standing right in front of him. Badge, please. My badge is under review. I'm here for the audit hearing on the 3rd floor. The guard checked his tablet, scrolled down the list, scrolled again. You're not on the visitor list. He dropped his voice. There was some embarrassment in it, but a job was a job. And I have to be straight with you. There's a note on your file. Building management wants security notified if you show up without authorization. He reached for his radio. Please wait here. Morning sun cut through the lobby windows. A few floors up, Roosevelt Drake, owner of a 40-year empire, was about to open the hearing. Behind closed doors, Kevin Bowman had already taken his seat, pressed shirt and rehearsed lines and all, and Dulcie Watson stood on the wrong side of the turnstile, holding a cloth bag that could change everything. In the lobby, over the crackle of the radio, a familiar voice cut through. She's with me, as Duffy was coming through the far side of the turnstiles, still in her morning shift scrubs. She looked at the guard, then swiped her badge across the reader and held the turnstile open for Dulcie as the light went green. Ma'am, I have to log you as an escort. Liability? Then log it, Asma said. Her voice was calm, but it had steel underneath. Asma Duffy, D-U-F-F-Y, 8 years a nurse. I know exactly what I'm doing, so spell it right. Then she turned to Dulcie and said the one sentence that carried all those years of friendship in it. Think of it like the Thursday morning spot. Walk. Neither of them said a word in the elevator. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, Asma touched Dulcie's arm briefly and stepped back. The rest of this is yours. It always was. The conference room door was heavy. Dulcie pushed it open and walked back into the room she'd walked out of 3 weeks earlier, through the silence of more than 50 people. The room wasn't crowded this time, but it felt heavier. Roosevelt Drake sat at the head of the long table, Idris Salas beside him, stamped folders laid out in front of them. Ethan Barton was taking notes. 2 campus administrators, 1 lawyer. And up at the screen, remote in hand, frozen mid-presentation, stood Kevin Bowman. The slide behind him read, Case Review, Recommended Closure. This is a closed session, Kevin said. His voice pitched a notch too high. Security? Security's already behind her, Drake said, calm. Then he looked over his glasses at the woman standing there and recognized her. Everyone did by now. Her photo had been on screens all over the city. Ms. Watson, I take it. Yes, sir. Drake thought for a moment that cost his whole life's worth of judgment. An employee of this organization had her name put up on a screen in front of 40 people before her case was even resolved. Since her name apparently fit on that screen, he tipped his head toward the empty end of the table. She can fit at this table too. Sit down. You have 5 minutes. Dulcie didn't sit. She stayed on her feet, pulled a single page out of her bag, and set it down in front of Idris Salas, right in the middle of the table for everyone to see. 11 lines, she said. 11 shifts where the count discrepancy showed up. Each line has 3 things: the date, the batch number, the signature that transferred that batch from storeroom to station. 9 of those 11 lines have the same signature. She didn't pause, didn't raise her voice. For years, I've logged every transfer that passes through this hospital in a notebook of my own. On the bus, on my way home. Nobody told me to. I chose to. Because I got caught once in my life without proof, and I decided I was never going to let that happen again. Only the people who've lost their reputation know what it costs. Kevin's face went white, and Kevin did what every cornered man does. He threw the biggest rock he had. She just admitted it. He slammed the remote down on the table, his voice filling the room. Did you all hear that? She's been copying company records without authorization and taking them home for years. This is stolen data, patient privacy, corporate confidentiality, security policy. Where do you even want to start? Those notebooks aren't evidence. They're the crime itself, and that alone is grounds for termination. Ethan Barton's pen stopped moving. He looked up, brow creased with worry. One of the campus administrators shifted uneasily. For a second, just 1 second, the balance tipped back the other way, and Dulcie felt the air in the room turn heavy against her. The same feeling from that courtroom 7 years ago. The feeling of proof not being enough. Drake picked up the page. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned, not to Kevin, but to Idris. Idris, lawyers can argue the legal status of these notebooks. That's their business. I only have one question. Do the batch numbers on this page match up with our system records? Idris opened his own folder and checked. Time passed. The only sound in the room was paper turning. They match, sir, all 11 lines. Then we've got an odd situation on our hands. Drake set the page back down. A record kept outside the rules turns out more complete than the ones we kept inside them. He turned to Kevin. The April logs, Mr. Bowman. The week they were done by hand. There are 14 pages in the archive and a number crossed out on the intake form. Explain that. Count error, Kevin said. Fast, rehearsed. Whoever delivered them miscounted. The archive corrected it. Standard procedure. As for what's in this woman's notebook, he said the word like he was holding it with tongs. Who's to say it wasn't written after the fact to fit whatever story suits her? These things always tell whatever story you need them to, don't they? The door opened. I can prove it. It was the voice of a man who'd set aside every responsibility weighing on him just to be able to look his daughter in the face with some dignity. Junior Rowe walked in, work clothes, a twin of the brown envelope already on the table in his hand. He'd been told to wait in the hallway with the other East Campus witnesses and hadn't waited for his turn. You could see his knees shaking even from the door, but his voice didn't shake at all. Junior Rowe, I was in the memorial storeroom in April. I carried the logs from the storeroom to the station myself the week the scanners were down. He looked at Kevin. Straight on. It was 17 pages. I counted while I was carrying them, because I always count. And in May, when I was signing my transfer paperwork, Mr. Bowman put an archive correction form in front of me, told me to initial it. I didn't. The next week, my transfer came through with a raise. He set the envelope on the table. It's all here. Dated, notarized, cost me $10. He took a breath and said the sentence of his life. Mr. Bowman, you gave me East Campus. You can take it back. But I can look my daughter in the eye now. Nobody in the room moved, but it wasn't the same silence as 3 weeks ago. This was the silence of everyone realizing at the exact same moment that something had just turned. Drake turned to Dulcie. Do you have anything in your notebook for the 3 missing pages? That day? Those transfers? Dulcie pulled the April notebook out of her bag, unwrapped it from the towel, and laid the open page on the table. April 9th, 10th, and 11th. 3 transfers, 3 batch numbers. All 3 came out of the B2 overflow storage. She flipped back a few pages. And here's a line from March 12th. Excess stock moved to B2 overflow storage. Instruction, Bowman. My own handwriting, that same day, on the bus. Idris Salas's face changed. He flipped fast through one of his folders. B2 overflow storage. That space isn't licensed for controlled substance storage. And he pulled a page free. Facilities maintenance records. Work order dated April 9th. Water leak in B2. Ceiling pipe. The person who filed the repair request. He looked up. K. Bowman. The pieces fell together in front of everyone in the room. A manager who'd moved excess stock into an unlicensed room to save on licensed storage costs. 3 batches damaged in a water leak. 340 tablets. If he'd reported the loss properly, his own instruction would have surfaced. So he hadn't. He'd disposed of the ruined boxes with no witness and no paperwork, kept the damaged batches looking clean on paper, and let the count discrepancy drip one shift at a time onto whoever's name showed up most often at the prep station. Then he'd called for an audit on his own department, because nobody suspects the man who reported the fire. This is a setup, Kevin said. He was talking fast now, too fast. I didn't make the call on that storage room by myself. There was budget pressure. Everyone knew about it. Ethan, he turned to Barton. Barton pulled back. And that leak wasn't my fault. The archive corrected those forms. I just signed. A moment ago, you said the person delivering the logs made the count error, Drake said quietly. Now you're saying you signed the form yourself. Both of those can't be true at the same time, Mr. Bowman. Kevin went quiet. Not because he had nothing left to say, but because he could no longer work out which sentence wouldn't sink him further. Drake rose to his feet slowly. Mr. Bowman, effective immediately. All your authorizations are suspended. Hand your badge to Mr. Barton. A brief pause. Drake had no way of knowing that another badge had changed hands in this same room 3 weeks earlier. But somewhere in Dulcie's chest, something settled quietly into place. This file goes to independent audit today, and to the prosecutor's office if it comes to that. And Mr. Bowman, that photo that went out to the press came off our own server. I'll have the server logs on my desk tomorrow morning. If I were you, I'd spend tonight with a lawyer. When security walked Kevin to the door, he looked back at the room one last time. Nobody looked away. This time, everyone was watching. After the door closed, Drake reached toward the yellow notebook on the table. He didn't pick it up, just rested a finger on the oilcloth cover. Ms. Watson, how many of these notebooks are there? 6, sir. Drake nodded, the way a man nods when he's already doing the math on something. We'll talk once this session is over, he said. And this time, nobody's going to leave you waiting at the door. Kevin Bowman didn't get fired outright. Big institutions rarely finish a person off. Usually they just point them toward the door and pull the curtain shut. After a 2-week independent review, Kevin was given a choice between a resignation letter and a long court battle, and for the first time in his life, Kevin saw a negotiation he was going to lose. He signed, but Memphis healthcare is a small town in its own way. The story of the B2 storeroom, the water-damaged boxes, the crossed-out number reached every pharmacy manager's ears without a single newspaper ever printing it. Kevin Bowman went on job interviews in 3 different cities over the next 6 months. In all three, the interview was over before the coffee went cold. The state board file and the referral to the prosecutor's office settled into a waiting silence after that. Not closed, just next in line. The source of the leak turned up on Drake's desk that next morning, exactly as promised. The photo had come off Kevin's own account, and that same week his phone showed 4 calls placed to Fraser. That record went from the hospital's lawyers to Dulcie's, and from there into the family court file. When the judge lifted the order he'd once called a temporary measure, he didn't check the clock this time. He had it entered into the record that Fraser's emergency motion had been built on information unlawfully leaked from an active investigation file. When Fraser walked out of that courtroom, nobody stood beside him. Dulcie was reinstated, but not to the same job. The hospital settled with her over the damage done by putting her name and photo on every screen in the city, and with that money, the first thing Dulcie did was pay her mother back. Joanne took the money, counted it, put half of it into her grandson's college fund, and handed Dulcie a receipt. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Roosevelt Drake's offer didn't come over breakfast. It came in writing, in a meeting room on the 11th floor. A brand new department to rebuild the controlled substance transfer system across every hospital in the system, double signature transfers, independent counts, and a protected right for every technician to keep their own records. The name proposed to head it, D. Watson. Why me? Dulcie asked. You've got people who design systems. We've got people who design systems, Drake said. We didn't have anybody who knew what it feels like when the system crushes a person. He paused. I've read a lot of audit reports in 40 years, Ms. Watson. I've never read one more honest than a notebook kept on a city bus. Dulcie thought it over for 3 days. On the third night, she asked Elias because these days her son had a seat at the table for the big decisions too. Take it, Mom, Elias said, with a shrug and the plain certainty of a 9-year-old. You were already keeping everybody's records for free. Might as well let them pay you for it. Junior Rowe stayed on at East Campus. The first company-wide policy Drake put out after the review dealt with protecting employees who reported irregularities in good faith. And even though it never carried his name, everyone in the hallway started calling it the Rowe Rule. Asma's write-up for the unauthorized escort disappeared from her file just about as fast as it had gone into it. She still hung a photocopy of it on her fridge anyway. My medal, she called it. 4 months later, on a Saturday morning, Dulcie and Elias stopped by the corner store on their way home. Elias picked 2 notebooks off the shelf, both with oilcloth covers. He held one out to his mother. You need a new one. Yours is full. I checked. At the register, when Dulcie opened her wallet, her new badge showed through the little window, the photo taken 2 weeks earlier. She wasn't smiling in it. Dulcie had never been the type to smile for a badge photo. But the day it was taken, Elias had been standing right behind the camera, yelling, "Mom, say cheese!" So there was something in her eyes anyway, the second right before a smile. They walked home. Elias wrote the date on the first page of his new notebook. Dulcie wrote something on the first page of hers too, but this time, not a date. Just one line. Some records you keep on your own. Others, thank God you don't have to. She closed the notebook and set it on the fridge shelf, right under the papers. The quietest one. The strongest weapon people falsely accused of something have is usually the quietest one. If this story made you feel something, like it and subscribe for more.